Welcome everybody to this month's, and this is what, September 2022, which is absolutely bonkers. This is the Microsoft Data Platform Continuity Virtual Group. With me this month is somebody I would consider a living legend, Thomas Grohser, also known as TG. I trust this guy's opinion on this topic more than I trust most people's fact on just about anything else. And I say that very carefully. So this is licensing SQL Server for high availability and disaster recovery. And with that, I'm going to turn that over to TG.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. If not, somehow reach out to me. I'm trying my best here. Yeah, I was asked to talk a little bit about high availability DR, and I choose the most boring version component of it, the licensing. But SQL costs a lot of money in production, and therefore it's probably a good idea to have understanding what you have to pay for and what you don't have to pay for, and how to get there. Because not just because there's some licensing possibility doesn't mean the version and the edition and the source you bought it from allows you to do that. Yeah? So bear with me. I have no idea if this is 1 hour or a little bit longer, but I try to make it. So next slide is a little bit about me. Yes, I'm doing this for a very long time. I guess I'm almost at 30 years with SQL Server, getting close, 2 more years, and helped a lot. And pretty big part of my job is to give Microsoft feedback, what they're doing, what they could do better, yeah, and what they're doing. So do we need to license? Because if you don't, you might not end up in jail, but you might have to pay a lot of money in fines and stuff, because it's kind of the thing is, and it's the right thing to do. I mean, someone actually put time, effort, and energy into building the product, so in the end, there's no way around. Yeah. From my experience, if you have a bunch of SQL Server and somehow you forgot one, or you forgot it to count it or something, that's not a big deal. If you run a bunch of SQL Server and you don't have a single freaking license, yeah, Microsoft might come after you. And it's not just that they make you pay, they also make you take out ads in the newspaper, admitting your wrongdoing and stuff like this. So your competition has a blast when that happens. So yeah, let's try to do the right thing. Why is licensing so complex? Yeah, because that's by design. The more complex it is, the more likely is you make an error, and the more likely it is you make the error into your disadvantage and not into Microsoft disadvantage. Yeah? I've worked for a bunch of large corporations, and every corporation I found places where they were just interpreting the licensing possibilities wrong. Yeah, they were, most of the time they were paying way too much. Yeah? And with way too much, I'm talking literally like 2x, 3x more than they have to. Yeah, so yeah, my licensing is complex. Oh, sorry, Microsoft, we have to bing that, but the results are as wonky. Yeah? Careful what you read on the internet, as in many other places. There's some good information and there's some horrible information. Yeah? The only document that you should need is from Microsoft, the current licensing guide. Right now, it's SQL 2019. Once SQL 2022 is released, the SQL 19 licensing guide is irrelevant. All that counts then is 2022, unless you don't have a version of SQL Server that automatically upgrades to the newest version. Then, of course, you stick with your 2019 license. If you're still using anything before 2019 licensing, you are probably paying too much. 2019 was the worst version in a very, very long time where licensing actually got cheaper. Yeah? Before that, licensing was always increasing in price. 2019 had a couple of changes that actually made it cheaper to license your environment. So keep that in mind. So And the real reason why it's so complicated is because there are so many options. So first we have to look at editions of SQL Server. Yeah? So the most famous one that everybody wants to use, but often is not possible because of the licensing cost, is Enterprise Edition. If I work for a company, I ask them one question: do you care about your data? If the answer is yes, then Enterprise Edition is the only option. All other options have things in them disabled that make it almost impossible to ensure that your data is 100% okay. There is the awesome one, Enterprise Edition Server. If your company exists for a very long time and they bought SQL licensing many years ago, and we're talking SQL 2008, and they never converted them into core licenses, then they have an awesome opportunity to save money. I've once worked for a company that had about 2,000 cores running SQL Server Enterprise Edition, and the yearly licensing cost was $45,000 for maintaining the software assurance on their server editions. Yeah. And yep, they were just got lucky that they had someone there that says, no, we're not exchanging them, regardless of how high the exchange rate is, because we will save money left and right, and they're correct. Standard Edition, Web Edition, which is by and large same size as Standard Edition, a little bit smaller. Developer Edition is the one that is basically free and that you can use on your development machines or test environments. There's unfortunately no Developer Edition is functional equivalent to Enterprise Edition. There's unfortunately no developer version of Standard Edition. So you either risk it that you run in developer and then have an awakening when you deploy to prod, that whatever feature you chose is not available, or your queries run in a different performance, or you have to bite the apple and buy a Standard Edition for your development environment. Express Edition is a completely free one, but it's limited to 10 gigabytes. There's Express Edition with advanced features. Don't ask me what the advanced features are, but it's there. Big data cluster, introduced in 2019, deprecated in 2022. So short-lived edition, but it's there. Azure SQL Edge for Internet of Things, Azure SQL Database, Hyperscale, Azure Synapse Analytics, which was known as the Parallel Data Warehouse, which is the next one, and the Data Center Edition, something they invented in 2008 and deprecated in 2012 because everybody revolted. The idea was if you have more than 8 sockets, you have to pay twice as much for every socket. And nobody was willing to do that, so they disappeared. And I'm sure there's more, or there have been more in the past. I just didn't know. This is what I could find and remember. And each one of these editions licenses differently. Believe it or not, but that's the case. Each line here is licensed different. So that's why it's complicated. We're going to focus on Enterprise Server, and Standard Edition. This is where this talk is. If we talked about everything, we would be in this Zoom meeting for about a week. So here, a little bit of an overview, what's different between the versions. The main thing is that Enterprise Server and Standard Edition have limits how many cores and how many CPUs you can support. They have limits on how much memory you can use, and Express Edition has this draconian limit of 10 gigabytes, which is only checked when the database is starting up. So when you use Express Edition, be very careful. If your database grows above 10 gigabytes, everything's fine. It grows to 20 gigabytes, everything's fine. It grows to a terabyte, everything's fine, and it's running. No problem there. It might be slow because it's not using a lot of memory and stuff, but it's limited. And then you have to restart the instance, and suddenly your system stops working. Yeah. So careful there. If you use Express Edition, I've been bitten by this before. Develop Edition, same as Enterprise, as I said before. Yeah. This is I will share the slide deck. So this is, you can use, this is just taken from Microsoft's website, nothing there. And here is the explanation what the individual columns mean. Okay. So you have to make a choice which one of these editions you use. Licensing might be a factor, the cost. The other one is the requirements that you have. If you have a gigantic database with billions and billions of rows, at some point standard edition is not going to cut it with 128 gigs of buffer pool. Yeah, it just might not be big enough. So as I said before, we're going to focus on enterprise and standard. So once you know which editions you need, you have to figure out how to purchase it. Sounds easy, you just purchase it. No, it's not, because you can buy individual boxes or individual licenses. You can make a contract to purchase individual licenses, or you can do pay-as-you-go, also known as renting. The individuals you can use, you can buy the full package product where you actually get a box with a licensing certificate in there. These days, this is also possible online where you just get the licensing key and you're fine. Yeah, the electronic software delivery. But basically, you're saying I need, I don't know, I have 8 cores and I need licenses. A core pack is two cores, so I need 4 of these core packs. You buy them, you install them, you're good to go. This is super simple, no contracts, no signing, no lawyers, no nothing. Everybody's happy, but it's expensive. Yeah. It could be that you buy it as an OEM when someone sells you a machine with SQL Server pre-installed. It could be a licensing solution partner, meaning you're buying some third-party software that needs SQL Server and it ships with SQL Server from that company. There is also the open program, which is basically instead of buying individual packages, you're just buying a sheet of paper that says how many licenses you bought. That is much cheaper because Microsoft doesn't have to put nothing in a box and then shrink wrap that box. They just print the licensing certificate that you get. And then there's Microsoft's products and service agreements, which is the thing is, yeah, and independent software vendors where, again, I said, you can license SQL Server through some other software. Yep. So just buying an individual license without any contract, without any upgrade rights, without any software assurance, without anything, again, 5 choices. So we had 12 or 13 editions times 5 different ways of buying them. Here we go. So let's add a few more. Yeah. Open value is basically the same as open, but you have to have at least 5 or more users. And instead of paying everything when you purchase the agreement or when you purchase the open certificate, you can stretch it out over multiple years. Enterprise agreement is the same on an enterprise level, which starts a little bit more volume. And these days it's accomplished by an enterprise subscription agreement. This is basically everything you do in the cloud is a subscription. Everything you do on-prem is still the enterprise agreement. Then you have the open value subscription, which is basically through another entity that is not Microsoft directly. You can also rent a SQL Server from a cloud provider. We probably all have seen that. Both Google and Amazon, they both offer pre-installed SQL Server machines where you basically on a monthly basis, or in most cases even like on a per second basis or per minute basis, you rent SQL in the size and configuration you're using it. Yeah. And then Server and Cloud enrollment is just another way of contract with Microsoft. As you can see, they're making this stuff up, yeah, every year. Yeah. Microsoft Service Provider License Agreement, which is the agreement that you as an internet service provider have to sign with Microsoft, so you can then sell the open value subscription to your customer. It's a nightmare. Yeah. So what we're going to focus on, and here I'm 1,000% sure this is incomplete and partially wrong. Yeah, because this is where even Google and Bing, if you use them both, doesn't give you everything anymore. This is a lot what I've seen over the years, and things, and they all exist. None of them is not available anymore. This is just a lot of different ways. We're gonna focus on enterprise agreement because this is what most people will have. Yeah, and this is what makes most sense financially. The next one is software assurance. You have to make a choice. If you buy a SQL Server as it is, as a perpetual license, and then stick with it, you can still apply service pack cumulative updates, patches, hot fixes, whatever you have. But when the next version of SQL Server comes out, you have to stay with the current version that you bought. Yeah. If you buy software assurance on top of your purchase of the current license, you can, whenever there's a new version of SQL Server, you can automatically upgrade. Right? And the price for software assurance is you pay basically by and large 25% of the purchase price of your license. Whatever you negotiate as your licensing price, then you pay 25% of that. When you decide to stop software assurance, you are frozen in on the version of SQL Server on the day you stop the agreement. So if you would do this today, it would be 2019. If you do it about somewhere early next year, it would be 2022. So assuming that Microsoft releases it this year, which is what they have announced. Yeah. Software assurance is not just that you can have the current version, and this is where 2019 comes in. This changed massively with 2019. Before 2019, all you could do is have a free DR. Thing is, with 2019, you have a free DR, free high availability, unlimited virtualization, and license mobility. That means you can move this around between the machines, and you even get one more free either AJ or DR if you choose to put it in the Microsoft Cloud. Yeah. Is this a little bit unfair to Amazon and Google Cloud? Sure, but it is what Microsoft's offering, so why not use it? You still have to pay for the hardware, but you don't have to pay for the extra license. And we will go into this, what's available with AJ and DR free replicas in availability groups. That's what this talk is then most about, the meat of it, which we're getting to very soon. So purchase option summary. You can purchase one time with a certain version. You enter agreement and pay cost over N years. That's the one thing is, or you enter license agreement where you pay as you go. On a monthly basis, hourly basis, even minute and second. Yeah. And with the second one, you can also have the option of software assurance, so you stay current. Yeah. And we're going to focus on license agreement that you pay over N years and focus, because on the other two, there's not much you can do. The one is you buy it, you use it, that's it. And the one where you do as you go is you rent it from the cloud. Okay? And you have to do your own math if this makes sense or not. So decision is rent or buy. We're gonna, in this talk, focus on buying. Renting is whatever the cloud provider offers. And you might be able to negotiate with them, but basically, everything I've seen is you end up paying way more for your licensing than when you buy them and do bring your own license. Okay, so let's see quick if we have any questions so far before we go into the next section.
I think right now we are good.
Okay, good. Everybody's falling asleep.
No, we are all completely enthralled in all of this because this is critical to all of our jobs.
Yeah. Okay, so We're going to go through how to license a physical server, how to license a VM, and how to license a container. Yeah, and have to do it in that order because each one builds on top of the previous one. Yeah? And yes, you can have a container that runs in a VM that runs on a physical box. And you have a gazillion options how to license that. So let's start with a physical server. First, we have to explain the wording I'm using. A physical server is physical hardware capable of running server software. Hardware partition or blade is considered to be a separate server. Yes, there's freakishly hardware servers out there where you can have, you buy a box and then you present it as two boxes or more to your operating systems. So many years ago, I used HP Superdomes, and we used them as one big box with 64 cores, but we could have technically presented them as 16 4-core machines or 8 cores or something in between. Yeah, even odd numbers would be possible, but not very efficient. Yeah, but you could slice and dice the hardware. Each one of them is considered a physical server from the perspective of SQL. So what your hardware does to split CPUs in less than a box is up to your hardware, but SQL doesn't care. Whatever you get as a partition and install the operating system on, and the operating system is going called Operating System Environment, OSE. Physical processor is a chip that goes into a socket on the main board. Yeah. And yes, a physical core is one core that can execute all type of code inside a physical CPU. And then a hyperthread is a way of splitting all the components of a core into two threads that can run in parallel, as long as they don't use the same component. So if one thread is doing floating point operations and the other one is doing integer operations, they run in parallel. If they both want to do integer, one has to wait for the other to finish. Yeah. Usually that gives you about 15, maybe 30% performance boost on SQL Server when you're running a data warehouse. You can find somewhere my talk about how to scale above one core, and I explained this there in many great details. Yeah. A hardware thread, from a licensing perspective, is either a physical core or a hyperthread. So, so licensing a physical server. Physical servers are licensed per core or core pack or per server if you have old licenses or you're using standard edition. You can do standard edition and enterprise edition in core and core packs. New licenses, you can only buy standard edition per server. If you have grandfathered old licenses, you can use enterprise edition per server as well. A core pack is a license for 2 cores. Minimum is 2 core packs. So if you would be able to find somewhere a physical server that only has 2 cores, which it hasn't been produced in like 10 years, you would still have to buy 4 cores or 2 core packs licenses. You have to license every core present in the physical server, used or not. So if your server allows you to disable cores, you have to still license that. And this is a very open question with Microsoft. And I'm calling out if anybody from Microsoft is on the call and wants to talk to me about it afterwards. What I want is from Microsoft is a signed declaration by someone who has the power to actually legally sign contracts at Microsoft to explain if this is true or not. Because as we will learn with Hyper-V, you can disable cores through a hypervisor, but you can't disable cores in your BIOS. Yeah. This is a statement made by many salespeople. I've never got that statement made by anybody who legally can sign a contract at Microsoft. Is it the case or not? I don't know. My opinion is it should not be. If I physically disable cores, I should not be required to license them. Yeah. Why I'm saying that? That is what Intel is doing when they are selling the machine to you. Intel is not building different chips for each number of cores they have in there. They're all making 28 core things. The one where all of them work, they sell as 28 cores. The one where one or two are broken, they disable 4 of them and sell them as 24 cores, and so on. So if Intel can do it and I don't have to pay for licensing for it, I should be able to do it and not have to pay for licensing. The reason for that is you might want to buy hardware now. You want to disable half the cores, pay for SQL licensing for half the cores, and then 2 years from now, you enable the remaining cores if you need them, and you don't have to buy your hardware again. Yeah? Keep in mind that these days, hardware is good for at least 5 years. It's no longer a 3-year thing. And I've seen companies that use hardware for 6, 7, 8 years, and they're still super happy with it. The days 20 years ago where hardware after 3 years was so slow compared to the new one, it's not happening anymore. Yeah, hardware is still good for almost half a decade. Yeah. Hyperthreads are included with the physical core. Yeah, so when you license a physical machine, you don't have to license the hyperthreading. Yeah? So if you have 4 cores, you turn hyperthreading on, you see 8 cores in the operating system, because through the hyperthreading, you only have to pay 4, and therefore you need 2 core packs for all that. With per server and client access license, you need 1 license per server, per physical server, plus 1 client access license per user thing is. If you have 10 servers, you buy 10 of the server licenses, but you still only have to buy 1 client access license per each user, even if the user uses all 10 of them. Yeah? Again, unfortunately, only available in standard edition for new purchases. So, effective licensing. Again, a big diagram. Green, you're in a good shape. If you have that kind of machine and you're using that many, you're buying this many licenses or this type of licensing, you're good. If you are yellow, meaning you licensing is effectively used, but you have over-provisioned hardware. You have provided too much hardware and it's not going to be used. If it's purple, licenses are underutilized. You can add more cores without increasing licensing costs. So basically, you're already paying for some number of licenses, but you're not using them. And red means you overpaid. You bought licenses that you don't need. So how does this look like? It's very simple. The first column tells you how many sockets. And since this is from a regular sheet of paper where I normally print this, I had to cut it into 3 slides. So the first one will show you for 1 socket, the next slide for 2 sockets, and the last one for 4. The next one tells you how many CPUs, how many cores you actually have, and then sockets times cores is how many in total. Enterprise agreement, if you buy that number of core packs, you are green. I can give you a preview already. Every line in this thing, it's always going to be green. You cannot miss. The only way you can license Enterprise Edition wrong is if you have 10 cores and you're buying 6 core packs, which would give you 12 core licenses. Yeah, but there's no specific limit. When you still have a grandfathered Enterprise Edition license, if you use between 4 and 18 cores, you are basically giving Microsoft free licensing without using it. 20 cores is why Microsoft unfortunately changed the licensing agreements in a way that when you use Enterprise Edition, you can only use it up to 20 cores with these server licenses. I don't know where they paste the 20 on. At the time where they stopped making Enterprise Edition, there were 256 core machines out there, but they cut it down to 20, and that's what we have to live about it. If you have more cores in that, you are not violating licensing agreement, but SQL will also not use them, because the version that runs an Enterprise Edition server has a hard-coded limit of 20 cores. You cannot go above it. If you use the core version and just license it the other way, you are breaking the licensing agreement. Standard edition works just fine per core up to 24 cores. If you go above that, you're giving Microsoft free money, because same as with the server edition of Enterprise, it will not use more than 24 cores. You can put in as many cores as you want. SQL will only use 24 at a time. If you use standard edition server edition, it's the same as with Enterprise Server Edition. If you use less than 24 cores, you are not using the possible hardware. Yeah, you might have some savings on the hardware, but really the money is in the license thing. If you go above it, again, it's not a violation. It's just not using anything above 24 cores. Bam, let's fall this down. Exact same thing with 2 sockets. The math is the same. You're just reaching the 20 and 24 much earlier because you have 2 CPUs there. So if you have 2 4-core CPUs, that already gives you 8. So if you have 2 10 cores, that gives you the 20, or 2 12 cores, that gives you the 24. So you're reaching it in half the time. I guess everything else works the exact same with 2 and 4. There is a slight difference because it is not possible to either license Enterprise Edition server or Standard Edition server, so they're using it completely efficiently. Because the only way to do it is 4x4, which is 16, which gives you 16 cores, and 20 is the sweet spot, and 24 is the sweet spot, which you can't reach because the next largest CPU is 8 cores, and then you have that. For a while, there was someone sold 6-core CPUs, but they are very rare and hard to get on. Yeah? So maybe that's a solution, but it's, again, it's just an overview. If you have 8 sockets, yeah, Enterprise Edition is your only choice. Everything else makes no sense. If you like math, this is the formula and decision tree that I use to build this table. So if you have any crazy odd number or even bigger machine, you can use this diagram and follow each and every question, and then use the formulas to calculate what's the sweet spot of licensing, including this for entertainment purposes, and if you have really nothing else to do. So to recap licensing physicals, yeah, you pay the actual cores that are in there these days, yeah, either through a server license or through per core licensing. In the end, you pay a certain number of physical cores that are in there. Hyperthreading is free. That's the important to know. Same as with VMs, we have to explain a few things. A virtual core is a virtual representation of a hardware thread. And if you remember, a hardware thread is either a hyperthread or a real core. Yeah. A virtual core is either hyperthread or the other one. So if you have 1 core plus 1 actual physical core, that gives you 2 virtual cores. So you get 200% of the performance for 200% of the price. Yeah, that's what you expect. If you have 1 core plus a hyperthread, that's also 2 virtual cores, where you get about 115% of the performance for 200% of the cost. Yeah, so careful there in virtualized environments when you end up paying per core. Thanks. So in a virtual environment, you have basically 2 choices. First one is you license individual VMs. The second choice is you license the whole underlying host. And the difference is, when you license VMs, it's the same rule as with physical servers, except count and limits are virtual core. So if you license per VM, it doesn't matter if a thread is hyperthread or a full-fledged core. You're paying the full license for it. So if you have a machine as a host that has 8 cores plus hyperthreading, it has 16 cores. If you now put a 16-core VM on it, you pay 16 cores, while when you would put it directly in the physical machine, you would only license 8 of them, because the other 8 would be free. Okay? So But you can choose to license the host. Yes. This licensing model, individual VMs, only makes sense if you have gigantic hosting farm and you only have like a very small handful of individual SQL servers and you don't want to bother with grouping them on a single host and not letting anybody else on it and making sure all this works. Yeah? The moment you have multiple hosts filled with SQL servers, it makes no sense whatsoever. There's no model where it would ever make sense. So let's go to the thing. When you, yeah, and it's the only option if you're licensing standard edition. Yeah? Luckily, standard edition is much cheaper, so paying for unused hyperthreading. What I would do is, if I have to license per VM, I would turn hyperthreading off on the host. Yeah, but again, often not a choice or not something you have control over. When you license the host, the licensing happens exactly as on physical machines. So therefore, our example from before, you have an 8-core server plus hyperthreading gives you 16 hardware threads, gives you 16 vCores. You use your 16 vCores in one VM, multiple VMs, whatever you want. You pay 8 core licenses. Okay? If you don't have software assurance, you can only run as many VMs as you have vCores. So you could only run, it doesn't matter how many vCores they have. Yeah? So technically, if you have these 16 vCores on our sample machine, you could run 16 VMs with 16 cores each. Yeah? That none of them will get any work done because they're constantly just switching between them is a different story. But from a licensing perspective, it would be legal. You could run 16 one-cores, but you cannot run 17 one-core. Yeah? That would violate. If you have software assurance, then you can run as many as you want. It's just one of the perks that software assurance gives you. With software assurance, you can have as many VMs as you want. Licensing containers. As with VM, you can choose to license the individual container or the host that runs the containers, which could either be a physical machine or a VM. So you can have licensing is licensed through the host, which is a VM, which is licensed through the host of the VM, which is the physical box. That means you pay the licenses on the physical box, and then you can do as many VMs and as many containers as you like, given software assurance. Or you say, I have just a handful of containers in a tiny VM. I license the VM, and then I use as many containers as I want. Or you can say, I just have one container with SQL Server, then you just pick that one. Yeah? Again, a very long thing. If you're ever in doubt, find someone like me, and I know I'm like opening like Pandora's box here. Shoot me an email what your actual situation is. I will probably ask you 15 questions back. So that's your fault. If you bug me, I'll bug you. But then I can actually give you the answer how many you have to pay. Yeah, it's basically the exact same as for VMs, just one level above, and which makes it a little bit more complex. It's exactly the same as for VMs, just that it's one level above and could be in a VM or on a physical box. Yeah. So far, I've seen very, very few people that use containers in actual production environments. I've seen lots of people using it in dev, but over time, 15 years ago, nobody was using virtualization in production, and now it's the factor, the standard thing to do. Price compare. We have a license for 32 vCores. We look at a one-time purchase every 3 years, Enterprise Edition plus software assurance, Azure, AWS. And the pricing is from November 2019. And honestly, it hasn't changed much because we're still having the same version of SQL Server and licensing hasn't changed much. Right? So let's have a look. We will look at the running total of the one time of all these options, and we will look at the average over time, how much this is the cost. So let's have a look. In the first year, if we do a one-time purchase, it would be $208,000. If we purchase it every 3 years instead of one time, it's still the same. We have to buy it. With an enterprise agreement, we would basically pay 1/3 of that. And with an enterprise agreement plus software assurance, we will pay 1/3 of it plus 25% on top of it for the software assurance. If we rent it in Azure, it's 118. If we rent it in AWS, it's 118 and $900. Don't ask me. It is so. I guess. So the running totals are the exact same numbers in year 1. Year 2, if we do a one-time purchase, there's no more cost. If we do a purchase every 3 years, there's no cost. In all the others, we have the exact same cost as in the year before. And our running total adds up. And the average should be the exact same because so far we have paid the same, except for the 1 year and 3 year where we now have half the cost because we had 0 in the second year. Year 3, enterprise agreement and all this looks exactly the same. So there's no changes there. Of course, the averages will slowly go down. I guess. Year 4 to 6, here's where the difference comes in. If we buy every 3 years, we now have to buy again. If we have an enterprise agreement, we still will keep paying. If we have an enterprise agreement with software assurance, we stop paying for the licensing because we already bought it. And now we are paying the software assurance. So this is a big drop in pricing. And this is why I said software assurance is the only thing that makes actual sense over time. Yeah? So if you look this for the next 3 years, you end up that your enterprise with software assurance totals you $314,000, which is the only one that beats it is the one-time purchase of 208. But now you have a 6-year-old version of SQL Server with the one-time purchase, while with enterprise agreement and software assurance, you still have the current version. If you do this another 6 years, the difference even looks different. Every 3 years, you buy another 2 times. Enterprise agreement, you keep paying. Enterprise and software assurance, you keep paying only the software assurance, and then you are down to $419,000 for a period of 12 years, which gives you an average of $34,000. Again, the only thing that beats that is if you bought it and then use it for 12 years, the same old version. And nobody wants a 12-year-old SQL Server to run their stuff. You know, there's no more patching, there's no more anything. So I think it's, yeah. The one that never went down in price is the renting. That stayed the same. That assumes that none of the cloud providers, once you're really hooked, will amp up the pricing. So all this pricing is based on prices of November 2019, but to my knowledge, they haven't changed much. Licensing doesn't go up and down like hardware. It's pretty much the same. So finally getting to AJ and DR. And with or without software assurance, that's the question. Yeah? And if after this presentation, anybody would decide to not use software assurance when they have AJ and DR, I would be surprised. But we have to look at it on the next page. 1 means you need a license the server, whichever version you picked from, and 0 means you don't need it because your software assurance or whatever thing you bought doesn't require you to buy the other version. Green is with software assurance, red is without. So let's get started. How many actual licenses? That is the previous pages. It just tells you, do you need to license that instance or don't? Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah. So if you have a primary, that you always need to license, regardless if you have software assurance or not. Your primary machine, this you need to pay. Yep, if it's development, you don't, but in any other case, you have to. Yeah. If you have high availability machine right next to it, if you have software assurance, it's free. If you don't have software assurance, you have to buy another license. Yeah. If you have DR with software assurance, it's free. Without, you have to pay a license. If you have an additional high availability node, you have to pay for it. If you have an additional DR node, you have to pay for it. Yeah? But there's very, very few people that have 2 DRs and 2 AJs. Yeah. If you have a read scale that you use for read scaling, you have to pay for it. If you have another DR in Azure with software assurance, it's free. Without, you have to pay. For every additional replica in the cloud, you have to pay. If you're in some other cloud, AWS, GCP, IBM, Oracle, wherever, you have to pay for it regardless. Yeah? So this is where it comes in. Is there a way to pay a little bit less than that? Yes, there is. So technically, you can phrase it slightly different how you build your DR in this case. So I said, if you have a second AJ or a second DR, you still have to pay for it. And if you classify them as, this is the DR for the primary, a second DR thing is, while in reality, it might actually be the DR for the read scale. Yeah? So let's have a look on the next slide. And it says unknown answer example. It's no longer unknown. It's fully known now. So if you have the primary and you do DR in another data center, and then you have another primary or a read-only, and you do that DR over there, that DR is free as well. And then these two can share an AJ, and the DR side can share an AJ as well. Yeah? And with that, you have to pay for the primary, you have to pay for the read-only, which is a given. You're using them both actively, but all the other ones are free. Yeah? And that is actually a pretty sweet situation. If you have another copy for DR in Azure, it's still free. And these nodes you can place wherever you want, in your own data center, in the cloud, wherever you want. So it's no longer unknown. This is known. And thanks to the lawyer who actually read the license agreement for me and clarified what that one paragraph meant. And Microsoft literally says, if you buy any other instance, you get another 2 for free within the same cluster. If you run this across 2 clusters and use a distributed AG, that's a whole different story. Then you have to license each and every site as if it's thing is. Yeah? So this is per cluster. Production or development? What is development and what is production? If you need it to run your business, it's production. If you're making money with it, it's production. Yeah? If you need to develop or test things you need for your business, it's development. Yeah? Edge case, you're a software development company. What is production and what is thing? Very good question. If you're a software development company, your accounting server where you write your bills and keep your track of your customers' payments and so on, that's production. If it's the machine where your developers test out the code you're selling, it is development. Yeah. If you're providing an instance where your customers can play, that is production, because that's marketing and selling. That's not development. Yeah? So as I said, your billing system is production, your test server is development. If you give customers to test UAT and train, that's development. But if you give a demo version publicly on the web, that's production. Yeah, so that is. An edge case that I came along in a company is funny. So what they have is they have a development environment where developers write, no question there. And then they have a production environment where they run the code that developers ran once every day. So it's a very tiny, it's the smallest machine of all of them is actually production. It's a tiny VM with 4 cores and nothing else. The development environment is like a 32 core box where like 100 developers run on. And the fun part is once the developers wrote the code and check it in, they have a test environment that is several thousand cores large, where they run each one of these checked in versions from the different developers several million times to figure out which one is the most effective one. And once they finished all the development testing of which one is the most effective one, they take that code, deploy it to production and run it once. Yes, Microsoft examined that site and it was classified as all the 2000 cores are development and not production. Technically, all they do is they test they test how efficient their software is, and then they pick the most efficient version of it and they run it in production. So edge case, but keep in mind if you ever run across something like this, there might be a big opportunity to save thing. When in doubt, ask Microsoft. Yeah, that's famous last words. But do not blindly believe what the answer is. Yeah? Again, most likely you're answering the sales guy that has an incentive to sell more. Yeah, so he's probably not going to give you the latest trick how you can save money. He's things. Yeah, I'm not saying he's like thing. He's just, he might not point you into the right direction or things. Yeah, try to find someone that is not benefiting from you paying more cores to help you with this. Sometimes it might pay off to pay a consultant for a day or two to figure it out. And things, yeah, but my sales rep said, as I said before, if someone tells me they have $1 trillion, I do not believe them unless I see it confirmed by something. Yeah. So if it's not in writing, if just the sales guy said something, no, now you have to pay for dev or something. And I've seen salespeople try that. Maybe not from Microsoft, but from other places. Yeah. No, it's please give that to me in writing and then we do. And with writing, I don't mean that the sales guy makes a PowerPoint presentation and emails it to you. No, in writing, I mean a letter from Microsoft with an official letterhead signed by a person that is legally allowed to sign a contract. Yeah, and that's not that many. It's not. In most companies, that's a handful of people, and they can all be listed in the company register. If their names is there, then they are actually allowed to do that. Yeah. And you would be surprised how many times something a salesperson says suddenly turns out to be not 100% accurate. Anyways, one last thing is that might influence the licensing is if you move data between environments. Yeah. And this is also a place where often the salespeople tell people the wrong answer. Yeah. So what you have is you can do backup restores, for example, between environments, or do some PCP or ETL between machines. And you could have from prod to dev or from dev to prod. When do that, if you go from prod to dev, development stays a development environment and production stays production. Yeah, you can always take your production data and move it to dev to use it for testing. Yeah, that does not make your dev environment a production environment. Yeah? This just says I'm using production data to test. How much this from a compliance and legal perspective is a good idea, that's a different story. From licensing, it's okay. Yeah, not saying it's okay based on privacy and other things. Yeah, so you might still have to scrub the data, but moving it from a licensing perspective is okay. If you move data from dev to prod, yeah, If you're not just using code, but if you're also moving data that you've prepared in dev, then your dev environment becomes production from a legal perspective. Yeah? Nobody's going to ask you to make your production environment, your dev environment, a production environment, if you develop for 3 years a database application and you take a one-time backup and put it to prod. Yeah, no, that's not. But if you keep doing this on a daily basis, then yes, your dev environment is actually production. Yeah. Linked servers or polybase, prod to dev. When you push data from production to development, your development becomes production. Yeah, because you're using prod to do that. If you're using it from dev to prod to copy over some data, that's funnily okay. So it's the opposite of backups and restores. If I'm your security office and you're pushing data from production to dev with linked servers, you are fired. Yeah, so don't do that. Same with replication. If you replicate between prod and dev, it becomes production. Same if you move from dev to prod, don't have linked servers between the two environments. Just don't. Script it out, make it an insert statement, run it on the other side if you actually need to move some data. Yeah, so that's it. So confused? Yes, we are. Because your head should hurt. Mine hurt by just going over it after actually understanding this stuff and doing it like for a living, usually only like 2 weeks a year when it's licensing season. But and let me tell you, we just covered about 5% of the whole licensing shebangs that's out there. We didn't touch big data cluster. We didn't touch migration, downgrades, true ups, all the things when it changes, what happens actually during a DR event, all this. Yeah? After, I'm happy in a year from now or so to do a part 2 about more complex situations, so that you can watch this like 2 to 3 weeks before, so you have a recovery time, and then come in here. So we're pretty good on the clock at 1 hour, so I timed this kind of correct. And yeah, I'm opening up for questions.
That was awesome. We do have a few. Some of these I think you touched on after they asked a question. One of them, with the limitation of only one HA and one DR instance of SQL Server included with software assurance, what are your thoughts on using distributed AGs, where the AG used for DR in another location only has a single replica, and there are 2 replicas in the other AG just for HA?
Step 1. Distributed AGs are great, but are not a good idea for DR. So that's it. Let me explain. So before SQL 2022, and I cannot talk about it, they fixed this in 2022. When you have a distributed AG, there is about a 50-50 chance when you fail over that the primary before the failover doesn't work anymore. Yeah. So distributed AGs, even if you put them into synchronous mode in a planned, distributed AGs only fail over as intended when the primary dies unplanned. If you do a planned failover, distributed AGs in about 50% of all cases don't fail over. So having them as a DR is a very bad idea, because 99% of all companies that I know have way more DR tests than actual DR situations. So in a DR test, 50% of the time, your primary environment gets hosed in the process. That means to go back, you have to refresh your primary from the DR side. And then when you go back, there's a chance, again, 50-50, that you have to refresh a DR environment again. So using distributed AGs for DR is, before 2022, a really bad idea. In 2022, they fixed this. Now you can fail over and it will all the time work. It's the same problem that you have when you use clusterless AGs, that every time you fail over, the other side goes kaput, because they're not designed to be failed over. Same goes for distributed AGs. Distributed AGs were done for scale out, and done for migrations where you actually want to destroy the source when you fail over or never fail over. But for practical DR, distributed AGs are a very, very bad idea. Also from a licensing perspective, because by definition, you have two separate clusters, and therefore you have to license the DR side again.
Sweet. One more question here. And I believe you answered this already. Can they use Developer Edition for testing backups to make sure they are good backups? No connection from this to anything else.
Yeah. So if you just need an instance that restores your backups and then runs a DBCC checkDB, that's completely free. By the way, that's also a change in 2019 licensing. If you have a passive DR or a passive AJ that is not readable, you can still run DBCC checkDB and you can still run backups and you don't have to pay for it anymore. Before 2019, you had to pay for it. That is also something they changed in the 2019 licensing agreement. You can now use the secondaries for all types of maintenance. Unfortunately, you can't do index rebuilds on the secondary. That would be awesome, but no, not there yet. But all the other ones, checkDBs, backups, and all that you can do on a secondary for free. And if you take your backups and restore them, that is also free as long as you never use them. Yeah, you can restore them, use checkDB, use do that, but you can't use them for anything else except when you do it in development for development. Yeah, but if you just have a machine that does nothing else than testing production machines, you cannot, like, at the end of the month for the one day, use it to create your reports. Yeah, no, that's not. But if you just use them to restore or refresh a dev environment, perfectly fine. If you run anything production on the restores, you have to pay for it. Other than that, you can just use a developer edition and be free there.
What
and
about
not waste the DR or AJ license.
What about previous versions prior to 2019?
As long as you paid for software assurance, you can apply the 2019 licensing agreement, regardless how old your version is. If you don't pay for software assurance, none of this matters anyway, because it's all tied to software assurance. All benefits that are in any form meaningful are software assurance. If you don't have software assurance, there's no free AJ, there's no free DR, there's no free anything.
Okay. Joe has asked the question, does anyone back up the inactive node instead of the active?
Yep, that's free as well. 2019 and above with software assurance. Without, you have to pay for it.
So what he's trying to say, everybody, is you should modernize and get to 2019 as soon as you can.
You should get to 2022 as soon as you can. Don't go to 19 yet. If you're planning on upgrading now, wait another 3 months and go to 2022. Skip the 19, because the hassle is going to be the same. Yeah. It doesn't matter. Yeah. If your stuff runs on 19, it runs on 2022. Yeah. Thing is, third parties, you have no control anyway. So that, but if it's your in-house stuff, just skip another version. This is like, you don't buy an iPhone 13 now when you know 14 is like shipping right now. Yeah? It's just not something you should do. Yeah?
Unless your third-party software vendor is not going to certify it for 22 for another 2 years, like we see all over the place.
Yes. So I have one case where a third-party vendor still insists on 2005, which is borderline insanity, but it is what it is. And I still see places where they still require you to run on 2016. Yeah, it's nothing you can do about it.
Exactly.
I've one environment where everything at the time was 2016 and 2019, with one exception of 2005. And in my current place, everything is in 2019, except of 5 machines that are 16 and 17. All of them are vendors. So for 5 machines, we have to maintain a lot of garbage, old version stuff, just for them. Yeah, there's nothing you can do about it. There's one thing you can do about it, not use the product. If enough people do that, they might actually start certifying much faster. And nice. Honestly, I get why everybody is afraid. Yeah. I've doing this for 30 years, as I said. Yeah. So I went through the 2000, 2005 upgrades. This was day and night. There were syntax changes. There were literally queries that came back with a syntax error after you migrated. Yeah. That was a nightmare. You needed to check everything. Yeah? After that, the biggest thing was, do I need to apply the sledgehammer or not when you went from 2012 to 2014 with the cardinality estimator changes? Yeah. So 2014 to 2012 to 2014, it could literally be that some queries were like off the rails. They still would finish, but not in a reasonable time. But you apply the sledgehammer and you turn back the cardinality estimator, everything was back to normal. So no reason not to upgrade. You upgrade, you apply the sledgehammer. The sledgehammer still works in 2019. You can still turn it back to the old cardinality estimator. But more and more people tuned their queries for the new one, so we're good there. Yeah. So the number of things that don't work from version to version is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. This is because Microsoft gives away and actually listens and has very good ways of getting all that drama when they run it in the cloud, because in the cloud, they upgraded everybody to 2022 months ago, at least parts of the features. Yeah, maybe not everything, but a lot of these optimizations, they go into the cloud version where they have millions of databases running on it, and they immediately see, since they monitor everything there, what goes wrong. And they have a lot of time when it makes its way into the box product to actually have all the countermeasures ready. Yeah, and they have people already trained on it and how to help in these cases. Yeah, so the reason that you don't upgrade are less and less. And I know I'm ranting and probably not a single third-party vendor on the call, but if so, it's not as hard as it was 20 years ago to certify your thing, is because the changes are minimal. You know, the last big changes were 2005 to 2000 to 2005, which is almost 20 years ago. Yeah, so time to rethink that and make that happen in every other environment. Yeah, if you write software for iPhones, Android, something like this, yeah, you have weeks to get to the latest version. Yeah, when they release a new OS. Yeah, and everybody somehow manages to handle that. Yeah, so same thing should be true for SQL Server.
Agreed.
And Rent.
Cool. Does anybody else have any additional questions? This has been phenomenal. If you do, please either actually come off mute or drop them in the chat window. So while we're waiting to see if there's anybody else, thank you very, very much for this. If you're listening to this after the fact, TG's information was presented at the beginning of the session. Or if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We can get in touch with him or anybody else that we need to. Okay, so I don't see any more questions. I would say thank you very, very much. Anybody who manages SQL Server on a daily basis needs to not only watch this multiple times, but practically memorize it, because if you can save your employer a significant amount of money, there's a really good chance that you can go to your manager and say, guess what? I saved you a ton of cash. Can I get a piece of that as part of a upcoming performance review? And you would be surprised. They may actually do that. So thank you very much. This recording will be on YouTube here shortly. And yeah, thank you. And just for everybody's sake, we will have Tim Radney on for the month of October.
Yeah. And I will send the presentation slides to David in like the next 5 minutes. So it's his responsibility to make them available to you guys.
Perfect. Awesome. So thank you again. Thanks to everybody for signing on live or watching this after the fact. And we look forward to seeing you for the next one.
Thank you. Goodbye.